So thanks a lot, everyone, for joining. Hope you're doing this together with some food and having a lunch break, depending on where you are in the region. If it's India, you might be at your breakfast by now. And then this will be a breakfast chat, which is nice. But most of you will be familiar with Tigerhall and know what we're all about. For those of you who aren't, we're a mentor media platform where you can learn directly from subject matter experts and senior business leaders through a mobile app looking like the one here in my background. So you can download it on App Store and Google Play and so on as well. So what we're doing today is something super exciting. We're launching a series for our HR community and all the HR users that we have on the app as well. Because a lot of the content that we are doing so far has been centered on leadership, sales, marketing, digital transformation, first-time managers, and so on. And then we realized we have quite a large community that is working within HR and learning as well. So that's why we're kicking off this webinar series. There will also be a trail inside the app and talking about areas like upskilling, learning, how do we engage our business leaders and so on. So very happy to be here with Ruchika and Pip. Thanks a lot for being here with us today. So we're going to talk today about upskilling and this challenge that is getting your CXOs involved. How do you get them on the train? How do you get them to care about a topic like this? How do you get them involved in the discussion and make them understand how important it is and what a long-term game this actually is? So both Pip and Ruchika, you've been in HR for a very long time. You've had a lot of experience in this field. Pip, you're the founder of People Collider. People Collider is a platform which educates HR professionals actually about different new technologies, technology ecosystems, and everything that is designed to solve both current and future talent-related business challenges. And before this, Pip has been in HR for her entire career, so working with companies like Group M, Royal Bank of Scotland, Infosys Consulting, and working within human resources in these companies. A lot of real-world experience, which is always helpful. And Ruchika Sharma is the learning technology lead for Amazon Web Services globally, based out of Singapore, but heading this function globally for AWS. And before this, she was working in different firms like Coca-Cola, Bloomberg, Standard Chartered, and all different markets, including Asia, but also the Middle East and Africa. So she has about 15 years experience in both leadership development, talent management, D&I, and also learning technologies. So a very exciting lineup and hearing your thoughts and opinions today. But first, let's get some thoughts and opinions from the audience. So we'll be starting with a poll that I'm launching as we speak. So I would like to know from everyone, rank your motivation at the moment to invest your time in upskilling on a scale of 1 to 10. And if you're in business, you can rank this from a business perspective. How do you feel about this in your business? And if you're an individual, you can also look at it from your own perspective. So in terms of the time invested, how motivated do you feel to do this right now? And there might be many people who have done this during COVID as well and taking some opportunity to learn while being stuck in different places. 40% having voted. And there are actually two questions. So there's one question that is ranking your own motivation. And then the second is, how reluctant is your management to invest in money and upskilling? So we'll see if we can see the difference between between your own motivations and how your management is motivated to do this. A few more seconds to end up the poll. Here we go. All right, so we've got a very motivated audience here. Most popular is 10. 29% of people think that there are 10 out of 10 motivated in investing their time in upskilling, which is great. And most of you are neutral. The half of the audience is actually neutral about how their management feels about investing time and money in upskilling. So it seems the audience wants to do this, but management is obviously not there yet, which is the perfect webinar for you to be at. That's exactly what we're going to discuss today. So kicking off just like from these poll results, Pip and Ruchika, what comes to mind when you see this? What are your comments? Perhaps starting with you, Pip.
Yeah, look, first of all, I love that so many people are actually a 10 out of 10, that they're really motivated to invest their time in upskilling. Those are the people who are going to be at a strong position to maintain their employability. It's disturbing and somewhat distressing actually to see the poor results on the management's willingness to invest. This might be because of the economic challenges that we know we're going to face. If we're not facing already, we will soon, in terms of as a result of the COVID pandemic. But yeah, it's good that we've asked if managers are rather than if we are, because oftentimes what happens if people who are highly motivated, like our audience, to invest in their upskilling, don't get the opportunity from their business, they either do it themselves or they vote with their feet and they go and find a management who is willing to invest in their development. Yeah. Richard, what do you think from this?
Yeah, I'd echo what you said, Pip, about I'd like to think that the fact that it's tilted towards neutral and unwilling is probably due to the circumstances that organizations, many industries are really facing today. So as an eternal optimist, I would like to think that perhaps that is why. And I think that that this is why we're having this conversation. It's so important to have this conversation about what is needed to keep all these organizations afloat. And then as we look into the future and what upskilling can do, how do we make a business case for it? So I think it's the best data that we could start with.
Yeah. It's also interesting if we were to ask those managers how many of them are changing their business as a result of COVID, how much are accelerating change either in their business methods, their models, or the technologies that they're using. I'm sure that there is going to be more than those they're neutral about investing in terms of changing their business. And I think we've always seen that disconnect in HR where the business is changing more rapidly than we're willing to change the people. So I wonder, maybe we need to do another poll another day, Nellie, to have a look at that disconnect.
It's interesting that you mentioned that most people leave because of lack of learning opportunities, right? And I know in Singapore that figure is about 40% of people who leave their companies do that because they don't have enough learning and upskilling opportunities. So it's such a key part to talent retention as well, right? Which is really interesting. And given that, let's start with a bit of historical perspective, and wanted to ask you, Pip, given where we are today, and probably especially what has happened this year, why is it so important to upskill today? And if it is so important, for those reasons, why aren't businesses more willing to invest, you think? What does this depend on?
Yeah, look, let's leave the second part of the question for the time being, because I think it's easy to say we don't have the resources, but I'm sure Richard and AWS have addressed that. Really, what is going on now? So we've always had change. There's always been the need to upskill. This is not a new phenomenon. Business models, methods, approaches, technologies have always been changing to take advantage of the new ways of working and customer demands. What we're seeing now is an acceleration of that, as I'm sure we are all aware. But for individuals, the need to maintain their employability, to be able to upskill more quicker and change skill, reskill, add skills. It's not just when we say upskilling, we're often thinking of getting better at what we're doing, or going deeper in what we're doing. A lot of the reskilling is not about that anymore. It's about being able to add different skills and knowledge areas to what we're doing so that we can participate in reinventing our business and ourselves. It's the parallel skills, it's the adjacent skills. It's not necessarily the deep expertise in wherever we are at the moment. As we move forward, I think that we're going to see a lot more people asking for support to reskill, but HR's got to change as well. We see this in silly things, jokes in memes. We see them all the time. One of my favorite ones just came out recently. It was someone who was asking in a job 4 years of experience in Fast API. Now, Sebastian Ramirez, who actually invented Fast API, tweeted that, I'd love to apply, but I've only got 1.5 years experience since I invented it. So I think that our approach and how we are upskilling very rapidly in what we classify as deep expertise, we need to look at that as well. And all of those combined shape how we need to approach, or a different approach to learning and development in the workplace.
Ruchika, do you see any indicators that this is changing as well? And especially in the technology space, is there a higher demand for this now? Or what are the indicators that you see?
I think in the last few years where I've worked for technology firms or technology associated industries, I think there's a very deep understanding within the leadership that technology and the kinds of technology and the people who are, to use Pip just gave an excellent example of there being a technology which is just a couple of years old, not even 2 years old. So there's a very deep acknowledgement and understanding that reskilling, upskilling is very important to stay afloat. And that, to me, having worked across industries, is a big difference in other industries which are a little more traditional, say banking, where there are very dedicated teams that think about the digital experiences, and so it's not all pervasive. The need to be upskilling and becoming more relevant and current in your skill set isn't an all pervasive ask from the enterprise. It is there in pockets. So I'm sure with the people we have in the session, there will be a distribution of how they see the need and the conversation around reskilling and upskilling. It will be impacted by the kind of industry. And the fact is that if you're in a company or in a firm where you're looking for indicators that it's time to upskill, if you're getting indicators, it's already too late. It means that your industry is moving and you're trying to catch up, and then you're trying to put in some kind of an upskilling strategy in place. That's the sad part. So there's going to be no marker saying now is a good time unless you're behind. So an upskilling strategy and a way to think about your workforce planning from a skills perspective should be something that's always in place. It can and should be fluid, but it should always be in place. There's the market indicators that tell you need to do it now. Those are lagging indicators, and following those is not the way to success.
And what are those indicators? Like, what is it like when a HR leader receives this? Like, what are those exact indicators?
Pip, did you want to say something?
No, it's okay. Finish off.
Yeah, I think it's when this will happen in an organization when the organization, the leadership primarily, along with the HR folks and the L&D folks, will wake up. It will be because someone within the industry, a competitor, a rival, it's that external facing outlook of they've suddenly moved and changed something quite dramatically and significantly, which tells us we need to do it too. Those are the indicators, but as I said, those are lagging indicators. If within the organization, if there are conversations about the next 1, 2, 3-year horizon, those can lead to much better reskilling, upskilling conversations that are proactive in nature versus now someone's gone and changed how they're doing business. We need to change it. That requires us to build or buy a certain skill set. That's where you are only lagging.
Yeah, I echo those points. And actually, you did raise, I knew you would, what I wanted to talk about looking to the horizon. And this is one of the greatest challenges when it comes to keeping ourselves relevant and employed. Let's face it, we do this so we can keep paying bills. But the need to be able to, the difficulty of looking out to that horizon. Not only do we need to do it to understand how our function is changing, we need our managers to do it. Actually, if we make it a more iterative process where business leaders, HR and employees are looking to the horizon together and imagining what type of changes or influences are going to come into the business, it is easier to extrapolate the newer skills or the newer mindsets. So I find those companies where there are, and it's very rare to find whole companies, but pockets and teams where we're looking at what is changing, how can we change, how can we do what we're doing better, differently. What technologies can we leverage as a business in the service of customers or the delivery of products and services to different markets Those are the conversations where the kernels of making sure that your upskilling is ahead of the marketplace. That's another reason why that neutral worried me. In fact, someone made a really good comment in the chat that we can use that to influence. That's true, but actually we should be seeing this far more as a iterative conversation where we're innovating together and we're able to see what is coming up, and we're preparing ourselves, both our business and ourselves individually, for what is coming.
Exactly. No, that's very, very true. Let's move a bit into the money conversation, because that's something that tends to come up a lot always when you speak with business leaders, right? It's about money and revenue and the bottom line, the top line, and all of these things. So first, a question to the audience: if you had all the money in the world, money is not a problem, what would you decide to invest in first when it comes to upskilling? Where would you start with your organizations? If you could do anything like flying to the moon and learn space technology, or anything that you can do, just type it out in the chat, and we'll see what people would like to start with when it comes to upskilling. But sadly, like we don't have all the money in the world. So I feel like, what are some of the ways which we can think about and like effectively facilitate that conversation with our senior leaders when it comes to having that investment conversation? We have learning platforms mentioned by Rubelin. More ideas? No one wants to fly to Mars? Not yet?
Good to see you, Rubelin. Glad you got in.
Yeah. Excellent. Ruchika, what are your ways of initiating that conversation? And because usually it does come to a hard stop, like, oh, how much is this going to cost? So how do you then translate the value and how important upskilling is, as we've just covered, in the business conversation?
Honestly, Nellie, in my experience, money, more than money, I find time to be the barrier when it comes to upskilling and reskilling. That is a much more difficult conversation to have than we need more money. I think we're lucky to be L&D professionals at a time where there's top-notch knowledge, information, and content available in droves, and a little bit of balancing how you're spending the money already. And a lot of the money that we used to spend on enormous events, it's all gone, and it will never go back entirely to what it used to be. So diverting money to more digital learning experiences is almost becoming easier. Again, speaking from my experience, but the biggest issue is time, is actually getting leaders, winning over senior leaders to allow their people to spend the significant amount of time it takes to learn something. That's the hardest part of the conversation for me, especially right now, with there being, the world having changed and there being so much pressure to try and just keep things moving in this very different way. I find that with leaders, there's a knowing and doing gap. Managers and leaders know learning is important. For the most part, majority of them will absolutely agree, saying, you're right, upskilling is very important, reskilling is very important to my business, to our business's survival, but knowing isn't the same as doing, right? It's one thing to know that I would like to be more healthy and I know how to do it, which is, that I eat better, and yet you continue to follow your exact same diet. And that's the knowing doing gap. And in my experience, that's my biggest challenge with leaders, that they know and they understand it's important, but the here and now is so compelling for them that allowing the organization and the people in it the time that is needed, the significant investment of time that is needed to really create change in the skills profile, that's the hardest conversation to have. And there are ways to get around it, but to your question about money, I would say money is a part of it, and there are ways to rebalance your budget, especially now with lots of digital options. There's no lack of content, there's no dearth of specialists. It's about time. Time is the barrier.
I would echo that. In fact, it's funny that we talk about time being the issue more than money. Economic arguments are always sound, and we can deal with them separately. But remember, again, I'll go back to a meme. There used to be one, certainly in my early career, that said, "What if we spend the money to train these people and they leave?" And the retort is, "What if we don't and they stay?" And I actually think that rings truer today than when it came out, 20 years ago when I first saw it. Because it isn't about the money as much as the mindset and the time. If we think about cost to learn, more than the cost of the financial cost, it's cost of headspace. We know that this time, it's not just the time to do the task, it's the headspace, the time to reflect and absorb. We cannot learn in a time of stress. I know we've all seen that one, if you didn't learn something new out of this pandemic, you didn't lack time, you lacked discipline. Well, actually in a crisis, most people were not in a learning headspace. It was too stressful. We were juggling kids. I don't know if you had time to learn, but there was no time for me. And it wasn't a business. It was just the stress and the anxiety and the impact on life. And I think that really highlights that it is time, but it's the time for reflection. It's the time to challenge mindsets. The cost to learn is a lot more than the monetary, the financial cost. And we really need to address that if we want to be able to foster the growth mindset of our people. It is always very difficult when we're pressuring people to do more with less in the workplace. We are working still crazy hours, even though we're doing it at home, and arguably they're crazier in some cases. So when are we going to get that break so that we've got the bandwidth, the space, as well, to access the learning that is so free and cheap and easy and easily accessible online? It's not like it used to be if we must send them to formal education and training.
Yeah.
That used to be the keystone of development. Today it is time and headspace.
Yeah. Christopher Tan has a good comment in the chat. Do you see that this period may it not be time as business is slowing down, but is it more of budget issues as not all companies are affected financially? So do you think it has changed more from time to money this year, or is it still time that is the primary one?
I would still say time. In fact, I think it's gotten worse. To Pip's point, people are busier. We're all learning. We've all, at least for the last few months, learned a new way to work. That takes headspace because that's also a change. So I feel like it's further aggravated, the lack of time, because we are now living very differently and working very differently than we did. And there were pockets of customer-facing folks who initially had a bit more time on their hands, but now it feels like even that's gone away because new ways of doing what they were doing have come into play. So now they're still very busy, and even those businesses that aren't impacted financially, the outlook is such that there's so much uncertainty that everyone's striving and trying that much harder to get through this year, that I find it's actually worse from a time perspective than it was before.
I agree. And I see a lot of those issues compounded in learning things that are outside your space. So I'll give you an example. We need to learn about sort of adjacencies, if you will, different skills. It's the reskilling, the adding to our skill set, adding to our arsenal. But not only do we need the space, we need to know what we're looking for. In social spaces, when we go to a meetup or a conference, we come across people with different ideas, and that gives us new ideas. We learn from other people. If we're just learning at home and Googling, then we have to know what we're looking for. Google is only good if you know what you're looking for. If you're looking to learn an adjacent skill, it's very hard to find. I'll give you an example. Once upon a time, when I started looking into AI, I had no idea what I was looking for. I thought I was looking for psychology for robots. Now, of course, nothing came up because I didn't know enough to put the right parameters into Google to be able to give me a useful result for me to be able to maximize my time. So that compounding of time and the format has made it worse. I have to put a caveat. That was back in 2013. And the topic I was actually looking for was artificial psychology, which I now know about. But I hope people take this idea away that we, by going online, because of our own echo chamber, and we're not touching as many different people that we used to when we were, out in the world, that it is much more challenging to find that information because of that echo chamber that the barriers of the digital world are much narrower than in the real world.
Yeah, exactly. And that's interesting. Like it is very much about time. And do you think then that, like, let's say this year, if people don't have time, it means we should upskill less? Or like, what's a realistic time investment to expect from a business and from the employees to spend on learning? Because I've also heard a lot of conflicts where it's the business has go like, no, don't take my employees out of business for like 2 or 3 days, right? Like I really need them on the floor. So what is a realistic expectation, and how do you have that conversation with your business leaders about the time investment?
To me, if I may, Pip,
Sure.
start with on that one. I have a point of view from some of my experiences on this. How I've seen this work, when a business leader says, you can't take my people out, here are all the stresses on my business. All of that is true, and it's hard to refute. But what it comes down to actually is those individual leaders. How I've seen this work is if you are struggling to convince your most senior leader, your CEO, don't start there. Find that one willing leader at maybe level 2 or level 3 in your organization who, despite having the same stresses, has a very different mindset. They believe in people. They understand that to truly be forward thinking, we need to be thinking about skills, and we need to be thinking about the workforce that we have, and the the various skills and how the composition of them and how it matches and where it needs to go over a certain period of time. There are always there's always at least one, and sometimes there are a few more, who understand this deeply and understand it innately, the value in investing in people to amplify or change business outcomes. So you create your dream plan with someone maybe a little further down your pyramid, if that's the shape of the organization, and over a period of 6 months, you execute that with that leader who is much more progressive in their thinking. And you measure as much as you possibly can that's relevant. And I really believe with confidence that you can make a success story of that pilot, and it will have a snowball effect because the results will be there to see. And we know what happens when one leader drives something that is successful, the others sit up and take notice, and that snowball effect will give you the momentum you need to cover more of the organization. So yes, leaders will come back and throw time and all the stresses on the business as a reason for why they can't devote, or rather allow individuals in their business to devote time to building their skill sets in a different way, in a non-traditional way, but go and find that leader who is open to that, and that will change the conversation over a period of time.
Mm. And as a follow-up, there's a question from Weishan in the chat a bit further up, which I think ties really nicely into this, because when you mention case studies and showing the results, if you pick your champion internally and you drive learning with them, but what about seeing results? Because usually that takes quite a while, and Weishan is mentioning soft skills as an example. When very often like positive changes do not come about as soon as management wants it to be, right? So do you then have that case study for the next like 5 years before you can do the next thing, or how do you balance that?
Yeah.
Well, I'll go first. I think the point about it's a very relevant point and really a fair challenge that the business throws at us, and we throw to ourselves. It is harder to prove, much harder to prove when it comes to leadership capability. Though I still believe in a 6-month period, no matter what skill building you're trying to do, there's a way to create a case. There's always a way to put that data together, from whether it's take baseline, take at the end around whatever it may be, wherever the sources are, gathering that. There's ways to use 6 months is enough to get performance information. It's harder to do with softer skills, but there's always a way to put that data together. So it is hard, but it's not impossible. Name any kind of soft skill that you're trying to make a case out of, even if it was, interviewing capability, which still isn't as soft. You might be able to prove that point too, where if you run something and then you show quality of hire over 6 to 9 months, there's always a way to use various data that's available in your organization of outcomes and link it back to your initiative. So I think it's doable. 6 to 9 months, doable. Anything shorter, it's not going to be robust, your analysis. But beyond that, it will give you a trend, and that's what you go with, and that's what gives you the strength and it gives the substance that you need to keep driving that conversation further and further in the organization.
Yeah, I tend to think that our way of measuring our ROI, or our return on investment on training, is fundamentally flawed. It is not, it's counterproductive. Okay, we know this. And Weishan, I think you've highlighted the very failing of our typical ROI formula when it comes to showing the benefits of training. I agree with Ruchika. I think the timeline needs to be looked at, but there are also multiple data points that can be used for multiple skills. Okay, so if we're looking soft skills, even engagement, team cohesion and performance are improved from this. So there's a plethora of data points that can be used as part of the formula you choose to use. What we need to do though is get our managers out of this idea that it is a fast return. We're used to it when we put it, and we think in business, this is always the way. We put money in, results. We want to see results in a short, give us those quarter results, improve. When as soon as we start talking people, as we know, things are not so cut and dry. We need longer timelines in a lot of what we do. Learning is no exception to that. In fact, if we think about it individually, we don't do a training and expect to see results straight away. We don't expect to see a higher salary immediately. Our expectation, there is a different time frame expected from us when we do it personally than when we're doing it for managers. So sometimes helping managers to understand that from a personal point of view, and that when we can show them the wide variety of data points that can be used to look at a different way of measuring success or way of measuring results, I think that will go quite some way to changing the idea in managers' heads that this is, A leads to B and it will do it in a quarter, because it just doesn't do that often in HR with people.
Yeah, I have to agree wholeheartedly with you, Pip. I mean, we teach, to just digress for a second and give another real world example. We teach high schoolers calculus. I'm sure most of us, if not all of us on this call, have learned calculus, and how many of us use it today? And I think it's a fair assumption to say most of us aren't using it, even on an annual basis. But there is real value in learning it. It introduces us to the scientific method of analysis, of deduction. And the return of that doesn't show itself immediately, to your point, Pip. So I too, like you, have a real problem with the pressure we put on ourselves to prove ROI when it comes to adult learning. And we don't do it in a similar way when children are learning. And it is so trends, and that's why I use that word very specifically. It's about taking a shorter time period, showing the right trends to generate the goodwill and the whatever else that you need to move forward with what you are trying to push in the organization by way of building new skills. But we know, we all inherently, even the leader you're speaking to, know that learning isn't this linear process that leads to an immediate outcome. And that should be okay. It isn't, but it ought to be. I just wanted to say that.
It should be.
That's a really good actionable point, like not trying to change, because it's hard to make people shift from thinking short term to thinking long term, right? So instead, bringing that a little bit like more short term and looking at the early indicators and the early trends and using that as a case study. That's a really good actionable point that people can do immediately. That's really good. I wanted to cover a bit is like, what are we skilling for? I think that's an interesting question in all of this as well, because there's so much talk in general about upskilling and reskilling, but what are we skilling for? And
That's
there
a
are
great question.
questions from Christopher and Minal in the audience as well, that ties into this topic. So the first one from Christopher is, if time is not in the equation, what do you think will be the top 3 skills that is important for business teams to curb with the impact of COVID as well? And Minal is raising a good point about it. We talk about upskilling. How are we trying to say that the skills, experiences, as well that we've garnered throughout our experiences, are they not valuable? So how about looking at how existing skills and capabilities, and then re-looking at how those can be used in this new world? So tying those two into it, like what are we skilling for?
Yeah. Why are we even talking about it?
Exactly.
I'm really glad thank you so much, Nellie. I'm really glad you picked up Minal's question, because I think it's an excellent one. I'm going to use actually myself as an example, and I'm not holding it up as the example, please, but just, I hope people can learn from it. I just spent 20 years in HR, and I just got good at HR stuff. And I did more. You know, I learned my remuneration just right. I worked with performance management, talent management. In my early career, it was recruitment, international mobility. So the skill sets in HR that I developed were good for an HR career. Now, things changed, as we know. Technology has come into the human resources space and into business in a way that concerns me as an HR person. So I needed to add to my skill set. What I do now, when it comes to bringing technology and people together, I can only do that because of my background. And I'm blending that with the skill set, the new skills that I've learned over the last 5 to 10 years that are additional. They're in parallel, they're complementing. So, Minal, I love that you asked this, because I think that there's a sense that when we're talking about reskilling, reinventing, that all my past is a waste of time. My experience is invaluable, isn't valued. Actually, our experience is invaluable. It is absolutely crucial. When you're looking at upskilling, and this goes to Christopher's point, when you are looking at upskilling or reskilling or adding to your skills, you're building on what you have already. You're not dismissing it. So the question of which 3 skills would you look at, it would depend on what would add another facet to you as an individual in your space right now. Okay, so, it might be sales, and actually behavioral economics or psychology is important to you. It might be, as I see a lot of IT people want to learn about HR. In fact, there is more IT people I know that want to learn about HR than HR wanting to learn about IT. And considering I know more people in HR, that's a problem. So if you're thinking about what you can become, it is a reinvention, but it's an evolution. We don't stop evolving, put a line in the sand and say, all waste of time, right, next. So that's when it comes to those 3, when you're looking to the horizon, seeing the changes, what is being discussed, what are in your group forums, what are being, what is innovative, what is coming up in conferences, what is coming up in written communication, will give you an indication about those complementary skills, knowledge, and expertise that can enhance and grow you rather than sort of chop you up and create something new. Sorry, over to you, Ruchika.
Yeah, I was enthralled.
Sorry.
So that's why I was just quiet. Again, really liked your answer there, Pip, and agree with it. It is very individual role, and even at an organizational level, dependent, and best answered there. However, I'll try to answer that I'll try to give a few that I think cut across and are probably are good things to think about and more widely applicable no matter what it is that you do. Because we live in a world right now where digital transformation has been important, and as Pip said really early on, it's only been accelerated by the pandemic. And employees can only design, build, or even think about digital experiences only if they have a better understanding of technology and tools. And so with that, I would call out two things. The first is design thinking, uh, learning to think, uh, learning to use design thinking to think like a user experience designer, no matter which field you come from, is fantastic. It will help you think about whether it's your customer or your user journeys the way UX designers do. So that's one I would call out. Design thinking is applicable no matter what it is that you do. The other one would be agile and agile ways of working. And I think more and more in traditional industries where decisions are a bit slower and every time there is something to be made, it is a bit of a monolith that takes months to construct. And we don't live in that kind of world anymore. So learning agile ways of working the way a technical product manager would, and running scrums and developing solutions that are relevant, innovative, and fast, creating minimal viable products. That's another skill set that I would say is applicable no matter what you do. You will greatly benefit, and in HR, we would greatly benefit from from knowing these two things: design thinking to think about employee experience like a user experience. Yeah, and I know many organizations are beginning to think like that. Some have for a while, but these are big ones. I think the other one I would call out, it's not one that I've gotten into, but it's the one that I nurse. If I had more time, I would want to do more, understand more about data science. Again, applicable no matter what you do. If you can understand data science and what data scientists do, it's becoming integral to so many aspects of any enterprise's work that I think HR could benefit from that. And I know we needed three, and I'll add one at the end, which is very generic, but constantly learning. And now I'm going into my L&D professional facilitator mode, but making sure you're always learning and therefore building your muscle of learning agility is the most important. So it's even less about what it is that you're trying to learn. Yeah, to Nellie's point, learning the skill of learning, creating the ability in your brain to keep learning and absorbing information. It's a muscle, and you have to keep using it to keep it strong. So I'd end with that one. That it's not a fourth, it's the umbrella.
Yeah, that last one is double thumbs up from me. Absolutely.
It's so interesting that you mentioned these three, Ruchika, because we work a lot with organizations as well in their upskilling and working with different employee audiences, and these three are literally the top of our demand wish list right now. Like,
really?
it's crazy. Yeah. And when you mentioned the last one, data science, like it's really like spot on. So when we work with different companies, these are the three that keep coming up all the time. It's always design thinking, agile ways of working, and data science, and UI UX as well, which can kind of fit into the design thinking part. So I think we're very, very spot on with those three observations, for sure. We have a question as well, like do you have any examples of organizations who you think invest the most and most successfully investing in upskilling? It's under the Q&A section. Anonymous
Okay.
So do we have any actionable examples of companies that we know that we think are doing this well?
I wish there were a lot that came easily to mind. Sadly not.
What a world it would be.
Wouldn't it? How do you think AWS is doing on that, Ruchika? Okay, I know you can't answer that perhaps.
Put me on the spot, why don't you, Pip? I could talk a bit about, I think I'll go back to that point about technology companies. I think functionally, when it comes to functional learning, there is a across the organization, there is an appreciation for the fact that if you don't invest some time staying up to date, you will absolutely fall off the grid. So functionally, keeping your skill set relevant, sharpening your saw, as Covey would say, is considered vital. And I think that's where for AWS, Amazon, and a lot of other tech companies, this is slightly different culturally, that appreciation for at least function. I would be lying if I said leadership development was any easier anywhere I've gone. It's always been different in pockets, but when it comes to functional upskilling, the appreciation for it is significant in technology companies, because the way you do your job, I as an individual, the way I do my job changes so rapidly that I can't do my job in a year's time the way I've been doing it. 30% to 50% of it is about to change, or there's so much bolted onto it. Even if it's not changing, whatever I know, and I need 30% more than I used to know in a year's time. So AWS, our services, we go from, about 30% services in our the variety of services we offer our clients increase every year. So our technical people and our customer facing people need to learn that at that rapid pace. So that the appreciation for upskilling technically is really strong in technology organizations. And I think that's where more traditional organizations, like I've worked in banking and others, it's not as strong, because a teller is, as we currently, a teller is still a teller who was a teller 40 years ago. And so it's a different mindset depending on the kind of industry you're in.
I echo part of that, but I just want to add to it as well, because I've been with some very traditional organizations, notably banks. But when Ruchika was talking about reskilling, a lot of what she's talking about was crossing the borders of the job function. Okay, so, and that is much easier for technology firms to do. Cross-functional teamwork and working in groups of people with very different skill sets is much more normal way of working for a lot of newer and technology companies than it is for more traditional companies. As a result, when we look at what training to prioritize and how we're going to I guess, develop our people, we're already thinking within our silos. Most of us have not had that opportunity in the more traditional businesses to learn about other things. Now, technology is the one thing that is crossing all of us. If most of us who are not in a technology company have worked in a cross-functional team, chances are you did that because of technology. Technology is crossing everything. In fact, technology is becoming the common language, regardless of your area of expertise. So when you think about how we are creating not just the learning muscle, we're also creating a common language and a way of being able to stitch different people in the business together to produce superior outcomes, superior to competitors, of course. Technology is a way to do that. So, and I've often had this when it comes to data science. People say it's analytics. Well, there's the statistical side of analytics. Yeah, and I don't know about you, but statistics, we'll just put that over there. There's the technological side of data science, not just the visualization, but where are we getting the data? We've already spoken about this. Where does that data reside? Now, I think I see a lot of very narrow thinking about what data points we could actually be using. In fact, if I talk to most HR people, most of our data points is what we see as our data points. Actually, for HR, people data points are everywhere in the business. And in fact, the data points that we have control or responsibility for belong to the business. As soon as we understand that the democracy, I guess, of the data points, how that is influenced by the technology, then we have more detailed discussions across our entire business, being able to bring those different skill sets and ideas together. This also goes back to the relevance of what Minal brought up. Our real value is our expertise, is our deep expertise. how we can deliver that is across the organization, not further deeper into that area of expertise, is able to put it across. And technology is a way to do that.
Excellent. And Steve has a question about your views on learning for early career employees. So technology might be a bit easier for them, the Gen Zers and millennials and so on. What are your views on the early career employees and learning for them?
Feel free, Ruchika.
Yeah. Well, I think the traditional model of, I have to say, I'm still a fan of the traditional model of you take early career employees and you let them, you have the luxury sometimes in many organizations where you let them rotate and move around and learn different parts of the organization and different functions, and they develop a more holistic understanding of your organization, but also learn a lot in the process. So I don't know how that's going to evolve with everything that's happened this year, but I remain a fan of that approach. And in an ideal world, and this is really going out there, but in an ideal world, we should be able to look at skills dynamically. The way finance views capital, that they can move capital around every quarter the way it's needed. And again, what a world it would be if we could think about skills and people that dynamically. And you can with early career employees, with these individuals who are younger to the workforce and are more malleable. And, you know, as you said, Pip, 20 years, I just learned a lot of HR things, and so many of us go there. And then that's where we find success, and that's where we continue to want to grow, and we hold on to it quite tightly. I think that's the biggest advantage with early career employees, that you can move them around, and you can they have strong learning agility, and you can move them around like human capital and create a much more dynamic skills environment, and put people where the respond to the needs of the hour. As HR and as business leaders, we don't think of individuals like that. It's always a much more longer term play. So I think there's always more flexibility, more things we can do with early career employees that is more dynamic, more fluid, more skills based, and much more challenging for them to give them the challenge of learning something quickly and deploying themselves. And they're often more up to that challenge because they come from an environment of spending all their time learning to then making the transition into working, unlike us, where we've been well entrenched in the world of working and we have a sprinkling of learning, and somewhere that balance just, it tips far too much in favor of working, and that's where we get less dynamism.
Yeah,
I hope
I
that
would add to
question.
that's a great answer, Ruchika. And I would add to the dynamic nature of it, with a diverse nature of it as well. If we think about, people of my vintage, when we entered the workplace, the deal was you become a master in your area and you're set for life. Yeah. That is no longer the deal. The people entering careers now, special mastery in a single one does not lead to the success that it was promised from us. In fact, that's one of the reasons why my generation is having such difficulty, because diversity is absolutely key to our success today, not just the young. So I think I love the way that you answered that in terms of the rotational programs. I'm a massive fan of them, not just for young, but actually for everybody.
Yes.
To build that viewpoint of diversity. But I just want to introduce two other ideas, not necessarily answers, but when Ruchika was talking, I was thinking this is very like the apprenticeships. Remember in the old days, apprenticeships, you learned from a master, you went and attached yourself to someone, learned from them. Now, in those days, diversity wasn't the goal. It was mastery in a single was far more preferred. But imagine blending that with gig working. So we know that there is a lot of different jobs out there in the gig workspace. That fluidity that a lot of younger career folks have, I think there's a huge opportunity for them to be able to create a dynamic and diverse experience, early career experience for themselves. They don't need to rely on an organization. And for most organizations, I'd suggest to them, don't rely on the organization, take control of it yourself. But that idea, if we take that dynamic, diverse experience and blend the idea between the graduate rotation programs, the apprenticeships and gig workforce, we could come up with a really interesting early career model.
Very, very interesting. Well, that's
There's
a
a
very good
business idea in there, Nellie. Just saying.
Yeah, lots of great ideas. I'm like taking lots of notes for execution. Perfect. We're going to launch our final poll as we're coming to the end, and just asking people, how confident are you to have the conversation about upskilling with your management now? And while you're voting, since everything on Tigerhall always ends with actionable steps and what do we do next, I would like to ask both Ruchika and Pip, what is the probably one actionable step that people can take in the next 24 hours to have them start this conversation? Or it could be three sharp, short ones.
Have to think of that.
I'm happy to share if you
Yes,
need some more time to think, Ruchika.
I'm
Okay.
drawing blank currently for 24
okay.
hours. You
Yeah,
go.
no. Okay, so first of all, you need, and I'm actually coming back to COVID times, look at where you can carve out time. Okay, we're much more in control of our own time management these days now that we're not in an office. Look at how much time you can realistically give to your development. Second of all, think about what you can do with that time. It might only be 30 minutes a day. That's fine. Then think about what are you going to do with that 30 minutes? You might actually say to your manager, I have carved out 30 minutes here for learning. What areas do you suggest? You know, that's a great way of opening up the conversation. Get your manager involved and engaged in your creation of your development plan. It also moves that conversation away from money. You're talking about your time and a free way of being able to access information. You might even find something on Coursera, ask for their opinion on it. And then do it. Just start small. Often we think, oh, I've got to learn, I've got to go and do an MBA. No, it's actually getting into that habit of learning, that carving out that time, doing something simple, and then moving it from there. When your manager sees you're serious, they will start engaging with you in a very different way than asking for money and a large chunk of time to go and do a formal program.
Excellent. Any more actions from you, Ruchika?
I would echo the phrase that Pip just used, which is start small. And so if you want to do something very quickly in your organization that is impactful, think the way we design anything in technology, do it that way, which is start small, go fast, minimum viable product. So, you know, if you were to say, all right, I'm going to go out and say to my business leader, here's something that takes 20 minutes for people to do that's self-paced, but it's on this topic. Let's say it's actually on agile, and this is how I think it will be applicable. And why don't we take the next 2 weeks to ensure everybody does it? And off the back of that, we have a conversation. So you start with something very small, not time intensive, not expensive, just move it. And I think that's the way we work in agile and in agile ways of working, and in tech companies. You're just expected to keep it moving, even if it's not perfect. It's small, and you iterate and make it bigger and bigger. So that would be my tip.
Yeah.
And be brave. Start small, be brave. Have courage to learn something new. Oh, they're the results. More confident. That's great.
More confident.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well done, everyone. Good luck.
Our work here is done.
Oh no, I say good luck. Well done to the group, not to us.
So I'm happy to see that so many are more confident now. And for those of you who want to start small and just do it, you can find more by Pip and Ruchika on Tigerhall as well. Pip has a really good podcast on myths and mindsets in a changing HR landscape. So for all of those in HR, that's something really interesting to listen to. And Ruchika has done one on daily habits for inclusive leadership. So for all of those who are leading and want to do that more inclusively, I really recommend that podcast. So that's a good way to start small and just do it. And thanks a lot for joining us. The next one is on 16th September. where we are with Amelia Green, who's the former Chief Digital Officer of PwC, and Yu Heng from Grab. And then we'll be discussing how do you manage change and go about changing things in your organization. So once you've decided this is what I'm going to do in upskilling, how do you then roll out and manage that change? So big thanks to Ruchika and Pip. Really appreciate you joining us here today. Really amazing answers, and love to have you here and see you soon again.
Thank you, Nellie.
Good
Thanks,
luck, everyone.
everybody.
Thanks, Nellie.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. Have a good Friday.
Thanks.
Bye.